Hi, this is Tom Craven from Ramic Connected Systems. Today's webinar is on the benefits of hosted software solutions. Or in other words, why would you use a hosted software as a service system for your plant-wide data collection and analytics as opposed to a more traditional in-house SCADA system with data logs and reports generated on site by your own people? Well, there's a couple reasons for that. The hosted solutions can be up and running much faster than installing the software yourself in-house. It can also be done for a fraction of the cost. So consequently, the return on investment is much, much faster with a hosted solution versus any of the traditional in-house data collection approaches. So some of the specific things we'll cover on this webinar. We're going to give an overview of traditional on-site architecture, what that looks like. We'll talk about why leverage the industrial Internet of Things, why connect machines, equipment to the Internet. We'll look at the hosted software architecture. Specifically, we'll talk about Ramic's Edge Scout remote monitoring system, but basically a common approach to hosted software or software as a service. And then we'll talk about how a hosted solution can deliver return on investment. So what do I mean when I talk about traditional on-site software? Well, in a traditional plant environment, all of the software is installed within the walls of the building. So you're going to have your control system, your PLCs or other controllers out on the factory floor. Somehow you're getting data from there up to a data server. The data server has the data logs in it. It would also typically be the place where the users would log into for their views of the data. Sometimes those are separate boxes, but we'll keep it fairly simple for conversational purposes here. And then someone has to maintain this system. Maybe IT, maybe your OT, operational technology or engineering type people, and maybe a little of both. But all of this is traditionally maintained at the specific factory location. So who owns and maintains the software? You have software for SCADA, the data collection, the data logging programs itself, whether that's a relational database or some sort of historian product. And then you have analytics on top of that. And what I mean by analytics are things like downtime analysis, overall equipment effectiveness, predictive and preventive maintenance programs, serialized production tracking so that you know specifics about a particular customer order as it went through your system, genealogy tracing so that you know what raw material went into which end products that came out of your factory so that you could do a targeted recall if there was ever an issue with a batch of raw material. User access is typically either over a web interface or some sort of thick client or PC software running on each of the user nodes. Software licensing and support contracts are common. The thing about the software licensing and particularly the support, you have to keep in mind what a support contract really means for any of this traditional type of software. It doesn't mean someone's going to come out and fix your problem. It doesn't mean that they'll even fix it remotely. What it means is that you have the right to call somebody and get them on the phone when there is any kind of software issue that surfaces. And that can be a fairly lengthy and sometimes tedious conversation to describe different error codes. They're going to ask you things up front like what operating system are you running, what patches have you loaded, all of those questions before they actually get to the particular software error. And usually the answer at that point is, well, have you upgraded to our latest version of software? Takes a long time, can be very tedious and painful. That's very different compared to a hosted solution, and I'll get into the specifics of why that is in just a minute here. But before I get into the specifics of the architecture of what a hosted solution might look like, I want to spend just a minute talking about the Industrial Internet of Things, or commonly referred to as the IIoT. Why would you consider using the IIoT, or in other words, why would you consider connecting equipment from your factory floor out to the internet? There's obviously security concerns. What are the benefits in doing that? Well, a lot of users today expect 24/7 access to data, and there's value in that. So if there is an alert that needs to go to someone who can fix the problem, even when they're not on site, or give insight to a problem, that data can be presented to them 24/7, either over a web interface or actually on a smartphone app. If you have OEM equipment in a plant, whether you're the OEM or the end user, in either case there are benefits to being able to fix that problem remotely, having visibility into the OEM machine that's running on the end user's plant floor. Some of that may be troubleshooting, some of it is upgrades. The OEM discovers a bug or potential bug in their software. They want to fix that for their remote users. They don't want to get on a plane and fly to every remote site. So there's benefits both to the end user because they can avoid a potential shutdown for a known problem. There's benefits to the OEM because they don't have to do as much travel and they can keep all their customers at the same rev level. Suppliers of raw materials specifically. You can have automatic reordering of any type of consumable product that goes into your system. If you run out of raw material, obviously you may not be able to run, and so notifying the supplier and actually generating an order automatically is becoming more and more common versus waiting for somebody to pick up the phone or type something in manually across the internet. All of that stuff can be handled directly by the computer system. Customers may want visibility into their order as it goes through production so they know what state is it in. Am I actually getting closer to getting my order shipped? What's the status of my order? Traditionally, that's a phone call and somebody's got to run out to the plant and talk to the production people and whatever that might entail. But we can actually give customers a smartphone app that would help them track their orders as they're going through production. And those are just a few examples. But all of these remote users need some sort of access into the factory floor to get this data. So on this slide, the left-hand side is showing the traditional on-site software that I described on an earlier slide with everything inside the walls of the plant. On the right-hand side, you see a hosted software system where the plant itself has the PLCs, the control system, out on the factory floor. Everything else can be remote. Now there is an edge node of some sort providing security and communication, not shown on this diagram. But really what you're looking at is the plant floor has the control systems, probably has some local operator interfaces as well. But from a data collection standpoint, the data is pushed out of the plant to a data server, and then all those remote users that I just showed on the previous slide, they don't actually have to connect into the plant. They only need to connect to the data server. And so when we talk about the industrial Internet of Things and remote users, that in itself is one potential reason why you'd want to use hosted software, because it makes it much more secure for remote users to have access to the data without letting them into the plant directly. But there are hidden benefits to this as well. There is no software to purchase. So you're not buying a version of software that eventually needs to be upgraded. You are paying for a service, and it's up to the hosting company, in this case Ramic, to keep that software up to date. So there's nothing that needs to be upgraded in the plant. There's no database to manage. A lot of traditional SCADA systems work really, really well for the first month or 6 months or maybe the first 2 years. At some point, the database continues to grow, and if there's not somebody actively maintaining that database, eventually your data collection system gets slower and slower, and your reports, trending graphs in particular, get painfully slow over time. Somebody's got to manage that database and keep it running efficiently. In a hosted system, that goes to the provider, to Ramic. In a traditional in-house system, that falls on the local IT department to manage. From a training standpoint, if you're going to install SCADA, analytics, data reporting, the data collection, all of those things require some training. For example, if you're going to do an overall equipment effectiveness solution, there's usually at least a full week, sometimes 2 full weeks of training before you even get started. You can bypass all of that development training with a hosted system because it's already up and running. All we have to do as Ramic, we have to add your specific equipment into our system. We might have to build a model of your specific machine so it's customized to exactly what you need, but the infrastructure and software is already up and running. It's also hosted on tier level 3 data servers, meaning it's got backup power, it's got redundancy. You don't have to worry about these servers going down. You don't have to worry about environmentally controlled rooms. All of that is already in existence in the data center, along with controlled access, so you don't have to worry about someone coming in and, for example, plugging in a USB stick and uploading viruses that way, those sorts of things. But it's fully configured, fully maintained, fully supported by Ramic. Now, we do, of course, get some customers that say, hey, that all sounds real good, but my IT department will never let the server exist outside of our 4 walls. And, I may push back on that a little and say, well, where's your SAP system reside? Usually in the cloud. Are you using, Office 365? Are there other documentation that's on the cloud? Why are you so worried about some of the production data? But be that as it may, there are customers that say it's got to be on site. Well, that's fine. We can certainly do that. There is an option for on-premise hosting. And what I mean by that is we're still going to host the software because we strongly believe that there is value in having the software provider maintain the system versus those endless strings of awkward phone calls trying to describe a software error. It's much more efficient if the people who wrote the software have access to fix the software. So what you see in this diagram is that the server resides within the walls of the plant. The configuration is done by Ramic through a remote connection, a remote secure connection, and then the users still come down through that same data server. So you're still maintaining some isolation between the plant floor control system and the rest of the world. We do require a secure connection, and we'll talk in another webinar about the details of security, but we maintain the software through a secure connection. So in some respects, that's the best of both worlds in that the server resides in your building, but it's fully supported and hosted by Ramic. So to summarize, what are the competitive advantages of a hosted solution? Well, for one, the cost is a fraction of traditional on-site software systems. And again, that's partly because all the software is already up and running. You're not buying your own copy of it. You're simply paying a month or an annual, in our case, an annual subscription fee, either per machine or in many cases per production line for the use of our software. And in most cases, that price is fairly comparable to what you may already be paying just for software support on traditional software SCADA systems. Now, there is also an upfront configuration fee as we build asset models for your specific equipment, but that, of course, is a one-time cost versus an ongoing. The second advantage here is that we can provide a very clear path to measurable return on investment. And the reason we can do that is we can tell you up front what the fee is going to be to configure this system and what the annual support costs will be or annual subscription costs will be. In a traditional system, that is much harder to figure out because you have to maintain the system yourself. And so it's difficult to understand how many engineering hours and how many IT hours it's going to take to get all of this up and running. We got a pretty good idea because we do it all the time. So we can give you a pretty accurate estimate, and in many of these cases we'll do it as lump sum so you know the exact cost. But we also know what it costs to maintain it going forward. Some of the in-house software, there ends up being, in many cases, a full-time engineer and at least a part-time IT person required to maintain the system. And so you can put a lot of hours into simply maintaining those systems once they're up and running. And again, that goes away if you're not maintaining the software in-house. So we can give you a measurable return on investment because we can define what the investment is. Now, the return is dependent a little bit on you because we have to together figure out where the cost savings is going to be. You know, can you produce 5% more end product if you can actually measure this maybe with an OEE system, that sort of thing? Or can we reduce downtime? Can we reduce service calls? Those sorts of things. So you may have a decent idea of what those numbers would mean to you. So that's the return part, but the investment we can tell you much more accurately with this hosted system. And with the hosted system, because all the software is running, we're just adding you as a new connection to it. The startup time is typically a matter of weeks versus months on traditional SCADA, or in some cases, you can spend a whole year or two getting up and running on a full-blown SCADA and analytics system. We can get that down to a matter of weeks. Yes, maybe 8 weeks, that sort of thing, but it's more accurately measured in weeks rather than months or years. I mentioned training. Obviously, there's training for the users, so you know how to use the website and the smartphone app. That should be fairly minimal. If you need a lot of training on a smartphone app, then it's probably not a very good smartphone app. So we try and keep these things as intuitive as possible, point and click type things, so we're not spending a lot of time on training. But the training I'm talking about here that we eliminate entirely is the setup, installation, configuration, and maintenance that you would have with an in-house software package. The system is fully maintained and supported by Ramic, and so that relieves you of a lot of on-site time and headaches. And finally, who benefits from these types of hosted solutions? Well, Edge Scout remote monitoring is used across a fairly broad range of industries. The analytics that are required change from industry to industry, but the basic structure, the foundation, and the hosted dashboard piece of it stays pretty much the same regardless of the industry. So from an end user standpoint, there are a lot of end users that recognize value in things like predictive maintenance or overall equipment effectiveness or simply downtime analysis, those sorts of things. But a traditional analytics system has been out of reach because they can't cost justify it. It's a big expense up front. They don't know if they have the expertise to maintain it. We make that really simple because with the low cost and low maintenance requirements, it becomes much more accessible to smaller end users. Now, what about large and medium-sized end users? Many of them have tried in-house reporting and analytics and realize the difficulties and expense of trying to maintain those systems. So we do run into a lot of customers that say, hey, we've gone down this path. it's not working very well for us, it's not getting updated, it's hard to maintain, let's look at a hosted system for all of the reasons I mentioned. Even the people who can afford the big expensive in-house SCADA systems are finding that they're not necessarily the best option. The other area is OEMs, because in some cases the OEM recognizes that if they can add additional services and benefits to their end customers, then they can sell more product or maybe sell service contracts. Now this tends to fit OEMs that are outside the traditional manufacturing industry, but there's a lot of OEMs that sell to businesses that don't have a way to measure and analyze downtime. You know, if you're selling to an automotive plant, that really is going to be analyzed and logged at the plant by the end user. But there are a whole lot of applications that are maybe going into maintenance shops. Agribusiness is a good example where it's going into farms. The railroad industry, a lot of that is done in-house, but not all of it. Some of the analytics is out on trackside equipment. And so there are many industries where the OEM can add value and increase their sales, increase their value to the end customer. And this approach works very well for them. So that concludes today's webinar. If you have any questions, please reach out and contact us at the phone numbers provided. You can go to our website at www.ramic.com or send an email to info@ramic.com. Thank you very much.